Inhalation is the most common way of being exposed to a chemical. Chemicals can get into the air in the forms of gas, vapor, mist, or dust. And if you breathe chemicals, they enter your body through your lungs. Given the large surface area of the alveoli in the lungs and the large blood flow to this area, even a relatively minor inhalation exposure has the potential for great damage. For an inhalation exposure, immediately move the exposed individual to fresh air. Bring them outside of the lab and outside of the building if necessary. Seek medical attention if the chemical is hazardous. Do not enter the area if the chemical is still in the air. If you are very concerned, contact EHS to check the area. Skin and eye contact is the second most common way to be exposed to a chemical in the laboratory. The first step after spilling chemicals onto the skin is to flush the affected body part with water for 15 minutes. Clothing and jewelry should be removed at and below the area of the spilled chemical. If a chemical gets into your eyes, flush the eyes for 15 minutes in the eye wash. Hold eyes open and flush behind the eyeballs and inside the eyelids. Eye washes must be activated at least once every week to keep the plumbing flushed with clean water. Turn it on and run for 2 to 3 minutes. These dates should be recorded on the tag at least monthly. Safety showers are tested annually by facilities services. Contact them if you feel a shower needs to be tested. You do not necessarily have to spill the chemical directly on your skin to be exposed to it. A contaminated object can serve as a vehicle for exposure. A contaminated cell phone can cause a chemical exposure. Accordingly, you should never text with gloves on or use your cell phone or iPad in general while wearing gloves. Due to the risk of exposure, it is also advisable to not wear gloves when using computers. If your gloves are contaminated and the next person uses the computer without gloves, you could accidentally expose your lab mate to chemicals. Basic procedure after contact exposure. Thoroughly rinse the exposed area for at least 15 minutes. Never neutralize the chemical on the skin. The resulting reaction can be more detrimental. Seek medical attention as necessary. And always ask for assistance verbally from your lab mates. Never make physical contact if you've been exposed to a chemical. Finally, call EHS to report the exposure. Ingestion exposure usually occurs when someone eats after his or her hands become contaminated. Thus, glove use and good hand washing can minimize the risk of this type of exposure. If a person is exposed to a chemical by ingestion, call poison control at 1-800-222-1222 or dial 911. Do not eat or drink anything unless directed by medical personnel. Puncture wounds occur when the skin is broken by a sharp object, such as a nail, glass, or needle. Puncture wounds that result in chemical exposure can be very harmful, and those that occur with a clean object can still cause infection. Contact medical help as needed. We can prevent chemical exposures in several ways. Inhalation exposure can be prevented by using hazardous chemicals in a fume hood. The fume hood is a source of ventilation. Puncture wounds can be prevented by using a sharps container to dispose immediately of needles, syringes with a needle attached, razor blades, and broken glass with infectious materials. Another key to avoiding puncture wounds is to never recap needles, bend them, or remove them from syringes. Stored chemicals can be equally as dangerous as chemicals you are actively using in the lab. Proper chemical storage can prevent exposure. Some storage guidelines are: store chemicals together only if they are compatible. For example, don't store acids and bases, acids and flammables, or oxidizers and flammables together. Don't overstock chemicals. Store hazardous chemicals on shelves lower than eye level. Remember, the farther the fall, the bigger the splash. Never store containers on the floor, as they are easily knocked over and broken. With proper handling, storage, and exposure preparedness, we can minimize the dangers of working with hazardous chemicals. Know the types of chemicals you are working with, the health hazards associated with them, and how to respond in an emergency involving a hazardous chemical. Working with chemicals is part of most biology and chemistry laboratories, and working with chemicals can be fun and rewarding. Chemicals should not be feared, but should always be respected. Preparing yourself to work with chemicals by reviewing SDS sheets, knowing what to do in the event of an exposure, and remaining calm in the event of an emergency will help you work safely with chemicals.